Hello and welcome back to Hoovian Espresso, and it's been a crazy time, I'll admit. We've had a bit of a crazy week this week, and it's come directly after Series 12 was finished, and I didn't really know what to do, but I've decided, even though I saw this a couple of weeks ago now, I saw the Faceless ones at the BFI. Now, my plan was initially to review the new 13th Doctor era figures, but they have still not arrived, and I'm going to be obviously patient about this because I know there's a lot going on at the moment with the coronavirus, but also it's not the only thing that hasn't arrived for me. My actual steelbook of this hasn't arrived, although I wasn't actually going to review this until Easter because I wanted to have that as an Easter egg present instead of Easter eggs. I don't really like chocolate. I know that's sinful, but I hate chocolate. But I did this last year. I got the Macroterra and I thought it was so much more satisfying than getting an Easter egg, to be honest, but but that's just a tradition I have, a weird tradition. But I've seen the Faceless ones and I was going to make a review after I saw it, but obviously I had my Series 12 overview then, and I was like, I can upload this, and then this week I was going to upload my review of the figures. They didn't turn up, so I have been notified on Twitter that all orders from the place that I got them from have been dispatched, but so hopefully they should arrive soon. Maybe I'll get a review up for them soon, but we'll have to wait and see. But for now, I'm going to talk about the Faceless ones slightly earlier. I can't do an unboxing of the steelbook. I couldn't have anyway, even if it had arrived on time. But I just wanted something to fill the gap. And, I mean, a lot of people are being forced to being put in quarantine. So, I mean, if you've got nothing better to do, feel free to enjoy my content. I'm sure a lot of it will come if schools get closed, and it's looking more and more like they're going to have to be, because in the UK we've almost reached 2,000 cases, so I'm getting more and more anxious about that, to be honest. But let's talk about the Faceless ones. This is the new animation from BBC Studios, which was released supposedly on Monday, although Zoom customers would have got it on Saturday. I didn't order it from Zoom, rather foolishly. I wish I had now, but I didn't order it from Zoom because I wasn't going to get it to Easter and it was £3 more expensive, so... But that's rambling. Let's talk about the actual story. The Faceless ones is one of the more, I think recently BBC have been doing more obscure stories. Obviously they need to do obscure stories in between really popular ones like Power of the Daleks. So this one is a bit of an oddity compared to Power of the Daleks, for example, or the Moon Base. To get animated along with the Macroterra, and the Macroterra was quite good last year. I think the animation from Power of the Daleks to Macroterra is there's a huge difference in quality here. The animation quality in this edition, I don't think there's much difference between this and not Power of the Daleks, but I don't think there's much difference between this and Macroterra. I think they're both just as good, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just there's like with each animated story so far, you could tell that there's been a massive leap, but this is very much stagnant, like it's very much the same, and I don't mind necessarily because the animation quality for this, while it's never going to be Disney Pixar level, God bless Disney Pixar at the moment, they're having a ride at the moment with Onward, which has just been released. That's set to lose nearly $100 million at the box office, but again, everyone's doing really shit at the moment because business is collapsing. But yeah, I can only imagine how much worse this is going to get. But somewhat ironic that this story would come out at the moment after airlines, we've been basically after non-essential travel has been banned in the UK. So I mean, it's getting more and more hectic. But the Faceless ones, the story itself is... It's an interesting one, and one that I think is very of its time. And it's also a six-parter, which is always a problem, to put it bluntly. There are very few six-parters that I think have worked. I've not seen Sharda like in its entirety, but even that doesn't work for me. The first Dalek story doesn't really work for me. So to have a six-parter is always going to be a struggle, particularly with a modern audience. I mean, I'm relatively young. I'm not necessarily the kind of audience that would have watched this originally, but well, I would have been the audience that it was based on for originally. But I mean, this story is very much like a sort of escapism that I think Doctor Who lacks at the moment. Like, a lot of the time you have huge political issues, but this one's very much like a sort of I don't know, this sort of political commentary on airline industry at the time, but it's not really a major focus of the story. So it's nice to go back and see different eras of the show have that sort of quality. I mean, I'm not knocking the political stories. There's been very great political stories in Doctor Who. I think The Green Death is a great example of a huge, brilliant historical story that I think still has a message today, even though it was made in 1973, I want to say. Yes, 73. But yeah, a lot of the problems I noticed from series 12 and 11 still plague this story, which I think is interesting. Obviously, there's the 3 companion problem again. And it's very obvious because Ben doesn't do anything for half this story. In fact, when I saw this story in the BFI, I sat there, I completely forgotten that Ben was in the story halfway through. I was like, oh yeah, Ben's in this story, isn't he? But this story does have a nice little spotlight on the Doctor more than anyone else. I think in these stories, the Doctor definitely got a very good spotlight, as he was the new Doctor. So the audience had to sort of get used to him. So you see him taking more of a lead than any of the companions do, which is interesting because I saw that and thought, hang on, this is exactly the same situation as it was with Ryan, Graham and Yaz. I could very much see Jamie acting in the same way that Ryan does in series 12, where he's comforting Samantha Briggs when her brother has gone missing. He talks to her and they sort of develop it more because they've got more time. So it's not just a conversation and a pat on the back for Samantha Briggs. They actually get involved in the story. But Annika Wills is they all give top-notch performances. I want to stress that. To be fair, I think the companions of the new series give top-notch performances as well. But it is a problem with the 3 companion thing. Even in the classic era, it still plagues them. And it's evident, like, even in season 19, when you have Kinder, you have the 3 companion problem, and Nyssa is basically put to sleep for an entire story, and you're left wondering, what was that about? Because it's never really explained. But in this case, Ben is just put in a, what I want to say, passport photo booth for about an hour and a half, I guess, because 3 episodes I didn't even notice him. But I think it's nice to see Annika Wills' different range. You see her as Polly, and then you see her as this other character that the Chameleon tours have sort of created, a sort of chameleon act, and True Little Spy, which is, again, very similar to the Casavan, I thought, actually, when I was watching it. It's a very similar situation where they're sort of implanting, like, spies to sort of register what's going on Earth and so on. I think back to the animation, I think the animation for the plane sequences and the going into space and on the space station towards the end of the story were actually very good. I think a lot of the other stories haven't really achieved or had to achieve that kind of animation, so it gives the story a much better scope compared to what you'd expect in a former Doctor Who story, like an older story, like they did with the Macro, they made the Macro more terrifying in the Macro Terror. They've done this sort of here because, like, I know there were stock footage shots of aeroplanes used in the Faceless ones, the original shot one, but I'd also think that for those shots with the space stations and going up into space, although I don't know for sure because I haven't seen the photo reconstruction yet, I would assume they used a model for that originally. So it does add, much like the Macro did, it adds a certain amount of scope that you wouldn't have been able to achieve back in the 60s. So in terms of, like, creating a new story, I think it's adding to the original story with that respect. Like, I know that a lot of people, there've been various oppositions to adding new visual effects and stuff, but I think as long as you're not fundamentally changing the story, like beyond recognition, like that you could still tell that it's of its era, I think it's all right to do that. And in this case, I think it's done very well and very tastefully. I have seen the original episodes 1 and 3 that I think are missing, and I think it feels odd to watch it in colour when I watched it in colour. I've always thought it's odd to watch these stories in colour in HD. But I don't know. I think the macro terror worked better in black and white, but I think this story sort of works better in colour, because obviously you have the monsters, which are vibrant green, and they look more alien, whereas they just looked a sort of like, in the original photos, they sort of looked like they were just like some scrumpled up bread or something. I mean, it's interesting. I think this story does work better in terms of using widescreen and having these vibrant colours that reflect the era. But the macro terror works better because it's black and white, because it's all corridors and sort of spooky, sort of like crab claws and stuff, and it's very horror. Like, it's got that kind of childlike horror aspect to it, which I think this story doesn't really have. It's still a fun romp. And I think I read an article by The Guardian that I think perfectly describes it. It's a fun story, but I don't think it's an essential story. Like, if you're just like a Doctor Who fan who dibbles and dabbles in classic Who stories, a six-parter, in my eyes, is usually never a choice for you, really. But like, if you're a completist like me, I mean, I haven't completed all of classic Who, but that's my current aim, is to try and complete classic Who over a course of several years. Obviously, I've been collecting for a long time now. I think it's a very enjoyable and very of the time, the 60s, the whole aeroplane business, like sort of taking off around that time, which is ironic, because if by May, like, loads of aeroplane companies do go bankrupt, like a lot of people are saying they might do, because of the coronavirus, it was a nice thing to look back on in terms of what it used to be like, and that sort of more peaceful sort of aesthetic to it, which you don't really get anymore, and a sort of little bit of nostalgia in a sense for particularly if you were born in this age. But I just like looking back at historical events because I like history, as shown by the fact that I favour historical stories in New Who over perhaps more sciencey or more story arc based episodes. So when this story sort of comes around, it's very much like, particularly the style of each episode and the way it's sort of animated is all very 1960s with the different colours. I also like the little references. There are lots of different references and Easter eggs that you can spot. I'm sure the most popular ones would be the Sash Dewan Master cameo on the Wanted posters, or the little Roger Delgado one above it. There's also Music Magpie. But also another thing about this story is it does like perfectly capture what it's like to be in an airport. You got the airport like the info bulletins, which I thought were a lovely touch. I love the little string of music, which is just so like that, and it's just very atmospheric and feels like you're going. You can sort of like you can feel like the kind of stress and tension that you would get if you were trying to get a plane or trying to get there on time, like just by being in that atmosphere, being in that zone whilst watching the story. So what I think this is one of the I think this is probably one of the weakest stories to animate. I do think out of all the ones they've done so far, although I am very much looking forward to Fury of the Deep because I've heard lots of good things about that. So I think it's one of the weakest stories to animate, and I think that's mostly down to the fact that it is a six-parter and it's very drawn out, and also it's got the disadvantage of the three companion problem, which the Macro Terror also I think suffers from as well. Although I think it does more interesting things with the companions, whereas Ben is just left by himself for half the story, for most of the story. So I think it's a pretty solid story in general, but it's not one of the best ones that they've animated so far. And I do find that it kind of annoys me that there isn't necessarily a difference between this and Macro Terror, but we'll have to see. I am very much looking forward to Fury from the Deep, but overall I would rate this story a 7 out of 10. I think it's a pretty solid story, but I think they could have maybe done a bit better. Particularly at the time, I think they could have made this a 4-parter and it would have been fine. But yeah, so also I'd cut all the. I'm very glad this was the companion story that exited them, even though that Ben and Polly did comparatively little in this story. Really, it was very much more the Doctor and Jamie, maybe a bit of Polly. I think Polly has a bit of a standout role here as well, but Ben just did nothing. Ben is the Ryan of this story, if you like. But yeah, 7 out of 10 from me. We'll have to see what happens in the coming weeks with the coronavirus and what arrives and what doesn't. because I don't know. My Doctor Who's Macbeth production is hitting a bit of a snag, because I need to get audio from someone, but we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, if we are put into quarantine, who knows, maybe I'll be able to get production accelerating a bit, because I have nothing better to do, will I? But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening/day, whenever you're watching this, and goodbye.